Hello everyone. For this video I wanted to give you some advice about how to do your career assignment. There are instructions on how to do it online. You've got a number of questions you're supposed to answer, but if you look at the other side of the sheet you'll see that there's a list of requirements that need to be completed for each question. So what I wanted to do now is highlight what needs to be done in each question, and along the way point out some common mistakes so that you don't make those mistakes. So the career assignment, and by the way also you might want to pull up, while I'm going over this, you might want to pull up the assignment so you can follow along with what I'm saying, or at least watch this again while you're working on it so that you know what I'm talking about with these questions. So for the first part of the assignment, it's basically a paragraph. It's going to be a story that you make based on your anticipated career. The person in the story could be you, but doesn't have to be you. Most people make it be a fictitious person. Sally's working at this place and this thing happens. The story needs to be one where a person has a choice about what to do, and it's a difficult choice. So it needs to be in your anticipated career. What you see yourself doing in the future, which is not necessarily what you're doing right now. So don't think that it needs to be a job choice situation that you could see yourself experiencing now. It could be something 5 years from now or 10 years from now. After you've completed your degree, you may be in a certain kind of job. What's an ethical choice situation that may come up with for you? So again, the person in the story, you can make up their name or you can have it be you. Either way is fine. But it's a paragraph describing the details of the story. Then you're going to move on to answering, in part two, answering questions about the story. And what you want to do is create, excuse me, you want to create a single ethical question that you're going to focus on. And it could be what's acceptable for the person to do, or what's wrong for the person to do, or what's obligatory for the person to do in the story that you've created. And focus on just one question. So don't ask all three questions, what's acceptable, wrong, and obligatory. Just ask one of them, like, is it obligatory for the person to do blah, blah, blah. So in the question that's called purpose and question, you want to identify the question that you're asking. Is it acceptable for Sally to tell the truth to her boss about John, or whatever it is? You also want to say why that question is important. And there, what I'm getting at is, ask yourself, how might this question come up in other careers? Like, how might situations like this come up in other kind of job settings? So talk about how the question that person is having to think about is one that others might have to think about too. The other question about information, it's asking you, what are the relevant facts that might help you answer the question? So the relevant facts are facts that pull you in different directions. So on the one hand, if Sally tells the truth, this thing might happen, but on the other hand, if she doesn't tell the truth, this other thing might happen. So you want to, in the question about information, you want to give facts that pull the reader in different directions. And a common mistake I've seen in the past is that people will just focus on one side, basically kind of give all the reasons why Sally should tell the truth, for instance, instead of focusing on other reasons why it might be wrong for her to do that. The other question about points of view is asking you, who are the people involved and what are their respective interests? So it's not actually a particularly difficult question. Think about it this way. You want, there are, in your story, there are going to be characters in that story. So there's Sally, her boss, colleagues, what have you. For each of the people in the story, tell the reader what that person wants. So Sally would like to maintain her good reputation by blah, blah, blah. The boss would like the company to work better on such and such thing. So for each of the people in the story, say what that person would like to have happen. The third question, I'm sorry, not the third question, the question about principles and values. You have a choice there of writing either about principles or values. If you go values, then values are basically single words like courage or reputation or honesty. Make sure if you use values that you say what the values mean. So honesty means this. And you want to give your definition in a general way so that it can apply to other things. Like a dictionary, again, when you look at a dictionary definition, they're not going to tell you what honesty means in Sally's situation. They're going to tell you what honesty means generally speaking. So when you define the values that you select, make sure that you give a general definition. And you can make up your own definition if you want, or you can get your definitions from other sources. Either way is fine. If you use principles, then principles are basically single sentences that give advice about what to do, like cheating is wrong or honesty is right. You may need to define words within that sentence. If, for instance, you notice I said honesty is right, that's a sort of a value that's in that principle. If it's a value, then you're going to need to define that for the reader so that they can know what you mean. And just as a general rule of thumb, anytime you use a word that someone might mistakenly, misunderstand what you mean by that word, you want to say what the word means. So honesty can mean different things to different people, so say what you mean by that. And again, that's not just for the career assignment, that's for other work too. It's generally speaking, if there's any way someone might misunderstand what you're saying, it's best to clarify what you mean by that. The question about assumptions is innocent looking question. It looks easy enough. What am I assuming? It's actually a really hard question. It's one of the harder questions in there because if you look at the requirements, you'll see that it's actually asking you for a cultural assumption. What are you assuming when you're describing that story that people from another culture might question? So like you might be assuming that Sally wants to maintain a good reputation with her boss, but perhaps people from another country would question your assumption that that people want to look good in front of their boss. Maybe you're assuming that all employees want to look good in front of their employer, when people from another culture might question that. So number 5 is hard because you have to think about things from a different perspective. The question about what am I assuming? So ask yourself, is there, another culture that might challenge the way I'm describing what's happening in this story, the way I've explained how the situation is difficult. The question about options and consequences is not particularly hard, but it is a little longer. So what you want to do is for each of the options in the story, you want to explain how each person in the story is positively or negatively impacted, meaning how do they get happiness or unhappiness or pleasure or pain. So what I would suggest is that you have a paragraph for each option. And so, it might say, if Sally tells the truth to her boss, then her employer is going to be upset because of blah, blah, blah. Sally will be happy because of yada, yada, and so on. And then do that for the other option. So like if Sally doesn't tell her boss, then the employer would be happy because of, and so on. So it's not, again, it's not hard. It's just a longer answer. The question about options and consequences. The question about the conclusion is one of those questions where there's a lot you have to do in that one question. There's actually 4 things you need to do in the question where you provide the conclusion. The first thing you want to do is answer your question, right? So the one of the reasons why you're doing this career assignment is so that you're creating a story where there's a difficult question that has to be answered, and then you're answering the question. So you're supposed to be using these prompts in order to help you arrive at an informed answer to the question. So in the question that's asking for the conclusion, you want to answer the question that you've set out. And so if your question is what is acceptable for Sally to do, you need to say, I think it's acceptable for Sally to do blah, blah, blah. Or if you think it's obligatory, say that. So make sure, one mistake that I've seen in the past is that when answering the question, there are times when people don't use a moral term to answer the question. So what I mean by that is, what if your question is, what is obligatory for Sally to do? And then you answer in the conclusion paragraph, you answer, and I say conclusion paragraph, that means the paragraph where you're going to answer the question that's called conclusion, which is confusingly not the last question. It's the second to last question. But anyway, when you're answering the question that you've set out, which is what is obligatory for Sally to do, if you say Sally will tell the truth to her boss, you're not using a moral term. Will is just describing what's going to happen in the future. If your question is what's obligatory for Sally to do, then you need to use the word obligatory in your answer. I think it's obligatory for Sally to tell the truth to her boss. So just make sure that you directly answer the moral question that you initially asked. All right, so you answer the question. The next thing you need to do is to provide a general principle that explains your answer. And again, on the side of the assignment that's called requirements, you'll see this spelled out, that there are three options for how to word a general principle. It might be like, if a person's in a situation which blank, then it's obligatory for her to do yada yada. And what you want to do is come up with a general way to fill in the blanks there. Again, there's three sentences that you can use. You want to use the sentence that has the moral term that corresponds with the question you asked, right? So if your question is about what's obligatory, then you use the general principle that has obligatory in it. What if my question is, what is wrong for Sally to do? Then, just to give you an example of how a general principle might be worded, I'm not saying you should word yours this way. You should word it based on your own ideas. But I might say, if a person's in a situation in which she can do something that harms someone else without their consent, then it's wrong for her to do that. So that general principle is general in the sense that it applies not just to Sally's story, but to other people's story. Again, if a person's in a situation in which she can do something that harms someone else without that other person's consent, then it's wrong for her to do that. It's general. And so you want to word yours in a way that's general, so that it can apply not just to your initial story in part one, but to other situations too. Probably one of the most common mistakes that I see with the career assignment is that people don't make their general principle general enough, or they even leave it out altogether. And you actually need that general principle for the rest of what you're going to do for this career assignment. So the third thing you're supposed to do in the paragraph about the conclusion is to apply your general principle to a different example. So if you don't make it general enough, it won't be able to apply. But for instance, the general principle that I gave about harming without consent could apply to other situations. Like, what if I could put my stinky trash in my neighbor's trash can, but I haven't asked for permission? My general principle would say it's wrong to do that because I'm in a situation in which I can harm my neighbor by putting my stinky trash in their trash can, and they haven't consented. And so my general principle would say it's wrong for me to do that. So what you're going to do after you've stated your general principle is explain how that general principle could apply to other situations as well as the one that you laid out in part one. The last thing you're going to do in the paragraph that's asking you for the conclusion is you're going to explain why you did not answer in another way. So if you said it's wrong for Sally to do blah, 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 why didn't you say it was okay? So just take a sentence or two to explain why you didn't answer in some other way. The last question is asking you about implications. And it's a two-part question. There's an A part and a B part. And again, the requirements gives you more information about how to do it, but I want to explain that briefly. For the A part, what is the impact of your answer on various stakeholders? What you want to focus on there is your general principle. So your general principle is that sentence. If a person's in a situation in which you want to explain in the A part, now that you've answered the question the way you did, now that you've stated that this is my general principle, how is following that general principle in your life going to impact the people around you? So for instance, with my general principle, perhaps now I'm going to always be asking for permission from my friends and family before I do anything if I think that what I'm about to do might harm them. Maybe that's a little annoying that I'm always asking for permission before I go ahead and do something. But then on the other hand, they might respect me more for being considerate. So a common mistake that I see with the A part of the question about implications is that people focus on the person in the story. What you're supposed to focus on with the A part is you, the writer of this assignment. Not basically with the implications question, you're not talking about the story anymore, you're talking about yourself. Now that you, the person who's written this assignment, this career assignment, have stated your general principle, for the A part, the question is, how is your following that principle going to impact the people around you? So don't focus on Sally anymore, focus on you. In the B part, what would happen if everyone made the same decision you made? What you're going to do is talk about how might, I guess I should say, because it's a hypothetical we're imagining here, how might the world be different if everyone followed the general principle that you stated? So my general principle about not harming someone without their consent, what would the world be like if everyone followed that general principle? So give us a sentence or two to explain what the world would be like if everyone followed your general principle that you stated before. All right, so format-wise, I get questions about how to word this thing. It's not a paper that, like in a standard essay where there's an intro and a body and a conclusion. It's more like paragraphs. So think about the first part. The first part's where you're going to state your story. That's a paragraph. Then you've got the question about the purpose in the question. Those are maybe like 2 or 3 sentences, but so it's a short paragraph. The question about information, what are the relevant facts? That's like a paragraph right there. Points of view, again, who are the people involved and what are their interests? That's a paragraph. It can take a little bit. I do see in the past, people will mistakenly sometimes put that in an outline form. You do want to use complete sentences. So you don't want to say like, Sally, semicolon, wants to look good. You want to put it in the form of a sentence, like, Sally wants to look good in front of her employer. Number 4, what are the relevant principles or values? Again, that's a paragraph. I'm sorry, that's not, I guess that is number 4. Assumptions, that might just be 2 or 3 sentences. Options and consequences, that may be multiple paragraphs. In fact, probably that will be. That for each of the options, you'll want to have a separate paragraph. The question about the conclusion, again, that's the one where you're going to do 4 different things. You're going to answer the question, you're going to state your general principle, you're going to apply your general principle to a different example, and you're going to explain how or why you didn't answer in some other way. That's a longish paragraph. You can break it up into multiple ones if you want. And then the last question about implications is, again, it's got an A part and a B part. You can make that 2 paragraphs if you want. Most people do, just so that it's clear to the reader which one you're answering. And then the other question I get is, can you label these things? So can you number your answers? And the answer to that is yes. So you can have, number 1 and then your paragraph, number 2 and then your paragraph, so that the reader can see which numbers you're answering. Make sure you proofread it. It does need to be something that's grammatical with good spelling. So use Word does a good job of kind of highlighting things that aren't spelled correctly. It might underline something that's not grammatical. I will be reading your work in Word. So if I see something that's been highlighted but you didn't change, I have to tell you, it's a little annoying that I'm correcting something that Word was trying to tell you about. So make sure that you use whatever methods you can, but Word is helpful, and there's spell checkers and there's software set up to check grammar. You can have friends read something. You can read it aloud to try to listen to it to hear if it sounds awkward. But do what you can to work on the grammar as well, because that's going to also factor into your grade. All right. Well, I hope this is a little helpful in just providing a little more detail about what to do for the career assignment. Please let me know if you do have questions along the way. I wish you luck. Thank you. Bye-bye.